I will note, Director, that it is 9 o'clock. If you want to begin, please feel free, and maybe a roll call's in order. I think you do that normally anyway.
Will do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Commissioner Racines?
Here.
Commissioner Meyer?
Excuse?
Noting that we expect him to dial in. Commissioner Pope?
I guess excused.
I think we're expecting him as well. Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Naves?
Excused?
Also expect her to be dialing in shortly.
Okay.
Commissioner Revel?
Here.
And Chairman Gordon?
Here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a quorum. I will go ahead and quickly read my announcements and disclaimers here.
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agendas and sign-in sheets are available outside the room. If you're here in attendance, please do fill those out. And for my disclaimer, key decisions pertaining to the Stable Token Initiative will be made by the commissioners of the Stable Token Commission or the state legislature in public meetings such as this. Further, the only commissioners are those appointed by statute, the governor, or a majority vote of the commission. At this time, Wyoming stable tokens are not available for purchase. Prototype tokens with no backing reserves and therefore no financial value have been issued on testnets for the Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, Arbitrum, Base, Optimism, and Polygon blockchains. These are for testing purposes only, and smart contract addresses are published on our website. As such, any website or platform claiming to sell or distribute Wyoming stable tokens should be considered fraudulent. Please do not attempt to purchase tokens from unauthorized sources. Information outside of these public meetings should only be considered factual and legitimate if it is distributed through our official channels. At this time, these are limited to our website at stabletoken.wyo.gov, the Wyoming legislature website at wyoleg.gov, and our social media channels with the @WyoStable username on Twitter, YouTube, GitHub, and Warpcast. Thank you. Commissioner Pope is now online.
Thank you, Commissioner Pope. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, if it is your pleasure, I'll go ahead and review today's agenda.
Please do.
Thank you. So no minutes for today from last month's discussion, which is only about 2 weeks ago. We'll go through those at our next meeting. We will go through our monthly budget review for the month ending May 31st. We'll discuss the status of redeploying our testnet smart contracts, and then go through a list of the agencies that we've been able to debrief on our initiative, as well as getting them set up with digital wallets. We have a couple of meetings to reschedule or schedule, perhaps, for special meetings. I don't expect to commit formally to any of those today, but we'll get some dates and times into the ether here, and we will take it from there. And I'll provide my industry update with a focus on the fact that the Genius Act did pass 2 days ago. We'll then go through an update on our launch timeline. We'll go through a rulemaking update memo, as we have a number of those in flight at current time. We'll go through our monthly process for the blockchain selection exercise. This month, within that quarterly process, is the criteria update. We'll go through a job content questionnaire for a proposed business project management analyst. We will review a policy memo. I think the stacks of paper you have in front of you are typically fatter than they usually are. I will note that these policies are being distributed for reference purposes. As we work through them, I want the commission to understand everything that we have in front of us and where it all stands. We will not be going through those documents necessarily in this forum today, but wanted to provide that for context. We'll go through next steps, our upcoming meetings, and then we'll open it for public comment.
Excellent. Any questions? There are none. Please proceed.
Will do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So first on our list will be the monthly budget review. Again, you've got 3 sheets of paper in front of you. The first 2, again, are the information we get from the Office of Administration Information's Accounting Department, as well as the summary view thereof. So taking a look at the summary first, we can see that the main driver of our month-to-month expenses continues to be salaries in the 100 series. We did not have any travel hit the budget really in May, although I expect some of those will be deferred until June, as we had travel in May. We just need to wait for those to get reimbursed. Our hardware and software costs have remained fairly stable. That's the reimbursement for services like Notion, which we use for our website, Zoom, and Breva, which is our email distribution platform. Our telecom charges are also stable, about $250 a month. And then we see that professional services are now kind of ticking up on a month-to-month basis. That's a reflection of the fact that we are engaging vendors, and some of them have upfront costs, some of them have month-to-month costs. We'll see how that moves going. Again, that top line is attorney services. That is our engagement with Paul Hastings LLP, who's been engaged for purposes of providing additional legal advisement. And then for IT services, that amount is our, for May, that 33,000 is the amount we have given to Inca Digital Federal, which is doing the open source intelligence for us as the kind of kickoff cost to start us and get us set up on their dashboard. So all in all, at the kind of 10,000 foot level, our expenses to date are $876,920 of $5.8 million available, or about 15 and change % of the total budget. Again, we expect those monthly expenses to creep up as we continue to engage our third-party vendors.
Thank you, Director. I'll let you go ahead. I just wanted to note for the record that Treasurer Meyer and Commissioner Meyer has joined, as has Commissioner Pope. Please go on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to put a bullet point on kind of budget from a high level, we have a remaining budget of $4,923,080 for the remainder of biennial fiscal year 25. So about 85% of our budget for half of the biennium. So we've continue to be good fiscal stewards there. Going into the summary level detail, not too much to add here beyond what we've already discussed. What I will say, if you turn to that second page and look at the amount that we have encumbered for those attorney services, you'll realize that number is over $900,000. Again, this is the engagement with Paul Hastings, the budget we have. We don't actually have to spend all that money, but as we continue to drive towards a launch, and compliance is a key part of that, I would expect some of those numbers to tick up again in the near term before kind of leveling out on a longer tail. And the final doc I have in front of you, which is the more colorful one here, this is again a cut of the very large models that our CFO, Joseph Saldana, has created. I expect once we finish the vendor engagements, this will be the model we use going forward. But this gives us a more granular layout on a month-to-month basis of our projected expenses. So you can see contract services as that top line, and it is a little small, I admit that. But that is we have in there all of the contracted services and projected contracted services on a month-to-month basis. We also have a couple other notes I want to make here. Again, in June, so not reflected in the May numbers yet, but in June, we have a $13,400 charge in advertising and promotions. Again, that line item may move depending on classification from A&I, but that's a reflection of us filing our USPTO and Secretary of State protections for the trademarks, which we'll talk about more in a little bit now that all those are filed. We also have some numbers ticking up. We'd expect numbers to tick up in July for advertising and promotion. That's obviously a fairly large number for just us doing a little bit of advertising, but that would be a number we'd expect to also include activity like market makers that we would bring into the fold on the issuance of the token and in terms of circulation. And then we also have a miscellaneous bucket that has a similar amount, which is about $500,000 for the remaining biennium, so $41 and change thousand a month. I bring those up to note that even with those increases, we are still projecting to have to come in under budget for the biennium with about $490,000 to spare, which is the number all the way on the left on that top table under year-to-date variance. Final note I will make on this is I did mention that we have a potential discussion about a JCQ for an additional, more junior business project management role. That has also been something we've highlighted as potentially kicking off in August and have budgeted both the salaries and benefits on top of that. So a little more going on this month than typical, at least in terms of the projections. Wanted to share those with everybody, but I think hopefully that is all straightforward. That being said, happy to take any questions on the budget, either for May or the projections going forward.
Questions? Madam Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Anthony, what is going to be the high level just duties of the analyst, and knowing that you're still working on the JCQ, but just big picture?
Through the chair, Commissioner Racines, we actually have the JCQ prepared to share that with you in a little bit. At a high level, this would be roles like helping us manage the day-to-day tasks via Notion, but we also have a little bit of a technical bent for this role. So the expectation is this is someone who could help us onboarding new users and the educational piece and digital wallet setup, can work with our alpha testers, can work with the pilot program, and then scale that once we're formally deployed into helping us really with the distribution of the token and making sure that people get into their hands that can use it wisely and well.
Thanks. Further questions? Any? Hearing none. Please proceed.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on to our next topic, which is smart contract redeployment. So as a reminder, we first engaged a company called Layer 0 to help us issue Wyoming stable tokens. They do that stable token issuance, and they're also a multi-chain interoperability provider through their messaging system. So they helped us in March launch the Wyoming stable token, again, on several test nets, so no value there. But they helped us get that out on 7 of our 9 candidate blockchains. And since then, we have engaged an organization called Fireblocks that helps provide the infrastructure on the blockchain side, particularly around key management. So essentially the controls you want to have in place to kind of turn your keys, for lack of a better term, and issue tokens or do any kind of functions with the tokens thereon. Those two teams, Layer 0 and Fireblocks, have formed a more kind of formal partnership. They do work closely technically, and now that's been formalized. We are looking to redeploy our smart contracts on that unified Layer 0 and Fireblocks infrastructure. I bring that up because I want to be specific that when those contracts are redeployed, we will update that information on our website to, again, prevent any confusion with potentially impersonator or imposter tokens. So we will let the community know which tokens are ours. And just a couple of other quick updates here on the timeline. Layer 0 did provide what's called application binary interfaces, or ABIs. Those are the ways you interact with a smart contract on a blockchain. Those were provided to us last week and reviewed on Tuesday of this week. Our training with Fireblocks is ongoing. Essentially, that is making sure we have all the controls in place for we want to take an action, whether that's issuance of tokens, burning tokens upon redemption. We have a multi-signature process that is already kind of stress tested and making sure that no one person can exert any kind of unilateral abilities over Wyoming stable tokens. So those are weekly trainings that we have. I think we've got one more to go. And then our Chief Information Security Officer, Keith Lawhorn, is creating documentation around all these functions to make sure we have appropriate segregation of duties. We'd expect the redeployment of the base smart contracts on 6 of our 7 candidate blockchains by the end of this week, with the final one by Wednesday of next week. And then there's some other functionality that is being rolled out in terms of APIs and front ends. So again, essentially the automated version is the API, front end is, let's say, our website, but there's more development being done there. So we'll have kind of the latest and greatest functionality in place by the time we launch. Any questions on smart contract redeployment? Or through the chair, I would certainly invite Mr. Lawhorn to add any context that I may have missed along the way.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, going back a little bit to the trademark stuff, I recall that that I think that there's an instance where Goodyear rubber, I guess, learned how to vulcanize quite by accident, but they patented it in the United States, but they didn't patent it in London. And so a enterprising individual found that out and patented it in London. And so the patent was, across the world. They had a problem with having the whole market where they could have had the whole market. So I want to make sure that we get the right copyrights, not only in the United States, but in other jurisdictions. So we don't have the possibility of someone in another jurisdiction essentially piggybacking on our efforts. So that's something that I wanted to make sure that was going to happen. in the course of protecting our copyrights.
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, thank you for the feedback. Again, we've now got our USPTO and SOS marks filed. We'll continue working with the Attorney General's office on this to make sure we have the authority to do these filings, or if we were to spend the money on it, that those would hold in foreign jurisdictions. I'm familiar with that process. I've done it before with my startups that I've worked on. I've not done it through a sovereign entity looking to apply abroad. So we need a little bit more understanding on that, but that's certainly on our list to kind of do the final checks.
Commissioner Wallace.
Yeah, Chairman, thank you. Just question on why are we only on 7 of 9 blockchains? Is there, what's the hold up on all of the blockchains? Are they having problems or just bandwidth issues? Or?
So through the chair, Commissioner Wallace, thank you for the question. So if you recall, the candidate blockchains that we selected were upstream of the procurement process. And if you recall how we did that in the early days, it was you need coverage on some combination of platforms that we thought could be involved in our procurement process. If you're on X chain, you need to have coverage on, let's say, 2 of 4 on-chain analytics firms was a good example. So we had that broad spectrum coverage. So 2 of these blockchains that we selected as candidates are not yet, because they use different programming languages, on the layer 0 tech stack at this time, although they may be on Fireblocks, for example, or they might be covered by our prospective analytics provider. So when we get to the monthly update for, I'm kind of revealing a little bit of hand here, when we get to the monthly update for the blockchain selection exercise, the singular criteria that we're looking to update is pertaining to very much the question you're talking about, which is making sure that these candidate blockchains are on the roadmap within the next, let's say, 2 quarters of development for those specific programs or platforms. So we're not being needlessly exclusionary. We just don't want to, we don't have the bandwidth nor budget to pick up another piece of a technology stack to accommodate 2 candidates when they're already likely going to be integrated into the existing tech stack we've already engaged within the next 6 months.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there are no other questions, I will quickly provide some notes on the interagency debriefs we've been performing. In the lead up to the launch of the Wyoming Stable Token, we want to make sure that our agencies within the state government of Wyoming are not only aware of what we're building as a team, but also have a bit more context about blockchain as it is an emerging technology. And also we go hands-on with them to make sure they have digital wallets and understand how those can be used. So we have completed those trainings and debriefs with the governor's office and the Office of Homeland Security, and we thank you for your time. Upcoming over the next couple of days, we have the Office of Administration Information tomorrow on Friday. On Monday, we'll be with both the Attorney General's office and State Treasurer's office at noon in the auditorium right down the hall. We'll be with the Enterprise Technology Services team on June 26th, as well as State Auditor's office, and then the Department of Transportation on June 27th. There are a few other agencies we've reached out to that we have either not heard back yet or we're still trying to get a fine time on the calendar. But and we do expect to continue rolling this out to more agencies as we move forward. Again, something another kind of junior resource could help us with, provided they're technically sound. And if there are anyone across the state listening and we haven't reached out to your agency, please do send us an email to stabletoken@wyo.gov. We'll make sure to get that on the calendar. Any questions on that? And I am also noting, Mr. Chairman, that we have Commissioner Naves on the line now.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any questions? Hearing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on to our next agenda item, that's going to be some things moving around on the calendar. Again, I don't expect to commit to specific dates or times today. We'll put kind of a ballpark in there and I'll follow up via email with respective offices. But the first one I want to bring up is that our August meeting is currently scheduled for August 21st. I do believe that a number of commissioners and members of our team will be at the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium in Jackson, which takes place from August 18th through 21st. So we believe that August 29th may be a better time for our next meeting, so just pushing back a week. Mr. Chairman, I am aware you are out of pocket, I believe, over the course of those, that maybe that day. But again, we can follow up with your office and the rest of the commissioners to make sure we have a quorum for that and coordinate on chairmanship of that discussion. I'd also look to potentially float a 30 to 60-minute session on Wednesday, July 2nd, before the holiday, to approve the final reserves management rules. We'll talk about this more when we discuss the rulemaking memo, but essentially the reserves management rules, the public comment period is due on, or complete on June 30th. And just based on the timeline we are on, we'd like to make sure we get that in front of the commission, get final approval on those rules, and we respond to any public comment. We get those over to LSO as soon as possible, and then we get through the approval chain as quickly as expedient and appropriate. I'd also float having or putting a placeholder on the calendar for Friday, August 1st for 30 to 60 minutes to approve any final policy documents. When we go through the policy memo, you'll get an understanding of the largesse of documentation and the complexity of the documentation we are working on. We are targeting a July 17th date to complete most, if not all of that. That being said, if there is overflow, if there is commentary, we want to be responsive to that proactively. And so I would float having a 30 to 60-minute placeholder on August 1st to put a final approval on any policy documents. Again, we don't need to commit to those now. I can float dates and times via email, but any questions or comments on those?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Meyer.
Yeah, one thing, get with Marissa and find out when you're actually having that July 2nd thing, because I'm probably going to be in New York at the stock exchange for a bell ringing ceremony. So that's something I don't want to miss, but I want to make sure that I'm able to cast a vote.
Through the chair, thank you, Commissioner Meyer. I think the good news is, if I recall my short time on the floor of the stock exchange, well, that bell will be ringing about 7 o'clock in Wyoming, and I'm not sure I'll be on the phone line then, but I will certainly make sure to do that and make sure you're free and clear. Wouldn't want you to miss that.
Thank you.
If there's no other comments on that, just as a final note on scheduling, generally speaking, we also, out of our control, but the Select Committee on Blockchain, Financial Innovation, and Digital Innovation Technology has moved their July meeting date to September. If I understand correctly, typically there are 6 Select Committee meetings throughout the year. I believe at a meeting of the Management Council earlier this year, they agreed to cut those dates down to 4. So we've had 2 of those dates in Jackson, May 14th and 15th. The expectation was there'd be a mid-July date and a late September date. That mid-July date is now going to get rolled into the September kind of back-to-back, taking place the 22nd and 23rd during the Wyoming Blockchain Stampede, which I believe will be the 8th annual one of those. And that'll be taking place in Laramie. I'm happy to field any questions on that, although again, I will recognize that that is with the legislature and not with our commission, just more of an FYI.
Questions, comments? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to our stable token industry update for the month. So the big news is we'll start with some numbers first. Stablecoin market cap is currently at or near its all-time high of $238 billion, which is up about 49% from $160 billion this time last year. There is now a $2.85 trillion of monthly transfer volume on stablecoin rails, globally speaking. So we continue to see this industry growing, and I think we're going to see more growth because as of Tuesday this week, the Genius Act passed in the Senate. And I think first we want to send a quick congratulations to Senator Lummis and her team. They've done a tremendous amount of work over many years around digital assets, going all the way back to the Responsible Financial Innovation Act and more of a market structure to it, to the Lummis-Gillibrand Payment Stablecoin Act last year, and now moving on to the Genius Act. There are happy to field a couple of questions on that if anyone has questions about the specific of what passed. It's pretty much in line with our expectations around the dual structure of state recognition versus federal oversight and the dollar thresholds that would cause you to go from one or the other. There is still a prohibition on yield-bearing stable tokens. There is, from an algorithmic stablecoin perspective, it's not banned outright, but it is in that there is a 2-year moratorium on, or an investigation on, or research on before they're kind of formally permitted. One-to-one reserve backing of highly liquid assets of US dollars and treasuries, so very similar to ours. So in some ways look similar, some ways look different, but I think all in line with expectations. In terms of next steps, now that that is through the Senate, we'll see, I would think, the Stable Act move forward in the House quite quickly, especially since the president is urging this to move through Congress quite rapidly. There are some differences that exist between the Stable Act and the Genius Act in terms of which federal agencies are overseeing those activities. But I think we'll see things move forward quite quickly. To that extent, I do want to note that banks and merchants continue to get involved as a result of this activity. Just 2 weeks ago when we met, we had heard about a potential unified stable coin to be used between JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, B of A, and Citi. Within the last, I think, 48 hours, JP Morgan announced they are going to have their own deposit token called JPMD, issued with Coinbase on the Base blockchain. Bank of America now announced that they are researching or working on a stablecoin. Walmart and Amazon and other large retailers are exploring stablecoins. And then we see these integrations happening on digital e-commerce rails, including an integration with Circle, which is the USDC stable token, on Shopify. So this is moving pretty quickly. I mean, it always has moved quickly, but we're seeing that become even more exponential in the rate here. Any questions on Stable Act, Genius Act, some of what we're seeing with the national?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Meyer.
Yeah, did Jamie Dimon get fractionalization or fractional lending in that? I know he was wanting to. I don't know whether he got in it or not.
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, it's not clear if there's a fractional token, but what did make it in is the concept of tokenized deposits. Now, those should be fully backed based on some of the definitions, but I think that's going to take a little bit of oversight and rulemaking to put a fine point on that, and there will be a longer tail on that process than the simple passage of this act. One of the things we've talked about, and Commissioner Naves and our Chief Risk and Compliance Officer, Ms. Deborah Brooks, has brought up in the past, even when these things pass, because there's so much interagency oversight, there's still going to be about an 18-month timeline to get those rules in place from the OCC, Treasury, Federal Reserve. So some of this will need to be kind of more fully defined as we move forward, but all of these different organizations are looking to get hands-on as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think the only way they could do that is to continue the stable token in circulation and pass it on to the borrowers' vendors, and the vendors would have to pass it on into, their vendors, and actually come to a full circulation protocol, just as if it was a dollar. So I don't. Once you burn it, it's burned, and so I think it would have to actually enter into commerce. And the nice thing about that is that once you issue one, it won't disappear like a $20 bill in 3 or 4 years.
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, well taken. One thing I should also mention is if you were to look at, let's say, the JPMD tokenized deposit, right? It's not meant to be necessarily as available or scalable, and its currently announced incarnation as, let's say, the USDC stable coin from Circle. It's meant to be used by kind of pre-approved institutions. And in that capacity, it doesn't look quite like what we're working on either. But again, I think we'll see how this shakes out. I mean, this is kind of the first opening salvo on what's likely to be kind of a long-tailed rollout here that I would have to imagine, based on, again, the discussion we're having about the Genius Act instead of there, will get to retail at some point in the not too distant future. Again, through the chair, just quickly to recognize whether Commissioner Naves, I believe, has joined. We also have our Chief Risk and Compliance Officer, Ms. Deborah Brooks, on. I would invite them to quickly add any context I may have missed in my discussion here. Hearing none,
Sir.
I assume that I've got it all down pat. Couple of other things just to quickly mention. From an international perspective, Société Générale, who had previously issued a stable euro called EUR Coinvertible, has now announced their dollar-pegged stablecoin, and that's going to be on Ethereum and Solana blockchains. And then we also, from an incumbent perspective, I believe it was a day or two after our last meeting, Circle did perform their IPO. That launched at $31 a share. I believe when I checked last night, overnight's up to $212 per share. So I think that is a reflection of how hot this market has become. Again, we are very well positioned for where we are with an imminent launch coming up, and I'm excited to be part of all of this momentum. Any questions on the rest of the news, anything I may have missed?
Questions? Hearing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with that being said, and speaking of launching, I did want to provide an update on timelines here. So you have a memo in front of you, the launch update and timeline memo. There are a large number of bullet points in this. We're not going to go through all of them, but to provide some background context, in prior meetings, I had mentioned us targeting a July 4th, 2025 launch date. In the meeting we had on the 30th of May, we had mentioned that would likely move a little bit down the pipe, but was still well within Q3. We want to make sure that we are not only engaging vendors in a way that's working for us as an agency and within the state's confines, there's also significant work to be done around compliance, technical testing, making sure we have the alpha and pilot programs off the ground, which will be downstream again of things like relaunching our smart contracts. We continue this educational and awareness campaign. We just talked about some of the interagency debriefs. And of course, making sure we align with our distribution partners so that the Wyoming stable token is readily available at the time of launch. And as such, we've rebaselined this, and we'll go through what all that looks like in a moment, but we've rebaselined our timeline to anticipate a launch on August 20th of this year at the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium in Jackson. So we'll have hopefully a little bit of fanfare to it in person when we do this thing. What we also wanted to do was make sure we gave the commission and the community a good idea of what we're still working on and what is in front of us as we approach this deadline. So in front of you, again, you have this memo with a number of bullet points in it. You also have a very large piece of paper with a kind of a high-level visual Gantt chart to all this. I will say this is kind of a consolidated version. If you would like to see some of the specific details, we do have those on our Notion board where these things are all connected. There are specific dates, but it is a large amount of detail. Doesn't scale well to these kinds of presentations as we found out in the past when we've done it. So should the commissioners want to see that, we can let you into the Notion board and have that Gantt chart ready for you, and it's live. You can play with it and see the impacts of moving one thing on another. To go back onto page 2 of this memo, to get into these launch tasks, we've broken this down by the finance, legal, technology, and operational verticals. So in terms of what we have in front of us from a finance perspective, our reserve management rules, again, we've talked about that previously. We'll talk about that more again when we talk about the rulemaking memo. So I want to overburden this, but again, the hope would be we'd have a pretty quick turnaround from finishing the public comment period to having a final approved version amongst the commission, and then getting that in front of LSO and the Management Council. In terms of financial infrastructure, we continue working with the A&I department, the accounting division specifically, to make sure that our GL accounts are included in the Wolves system and make sure that all of these things that we are doing that may be a little bit outside the scope of day-to-day Wyoming government initiatives are being incorporated into that system, which is quite flexible. And I want to give Commissioner Racines a quick shout out here for making your team available for us as well, as we've put a fine point on all of our accounts and making sure we're straight with what we've got going forward. And then in terms of distribution, like I said, working with centralized exchanges, payment platforms, digital wallets, and market makers for the purchase and resale of Wyoming stable tokens. That'll be downstream again, some of the policy work we're doing around Know Your Business and an LSP agreement. But we are getting data in from all of these organizations as we continue our discussions and volleying back and forth with them on the rollout. In terms of contracts, you'll see here what we are still in the process of negotiating. Again, we are trying to wrap things like investment agreements and investment policy statements, SaaS contracts, other things around the Wyoming state contract as the wrapper that brings it all together. Just making sure that we are well set on the kind of very nuanced points around things like indemnification, limits on liability, where we as a state really don't have too much flexibility there, making sure that we find a way for us and these providers to come together on all of that. In terms of policies, again, I will move quickly here because we have an entire memo about that, but this is just a high-level view of some of what we have in front of us. And then from an internal controls perspective, again, downstream of our work that we anticipate doing with Ernst & Young, this is where we will expect to have a fairly rapidly deployable set of internal controls for stablecoins, as we've, our procurement process was focused on finding vendors with existing and demonstrable abilities in the stablecoin realm. And then we'll make our appropriate tweaks for internal controls around doing this again as a sovereign entity and having some differences there from your kind of existing incumbent stablecoin issuer. From a technology perspective, again, we've already talked a little bit about the work we're doing with Fireblocks and Layer 0. So token redeployment is in here, as well as some finer points around the work we're doing Fireblocks, role assignment, setting up what we call vaults, which allows us to put the appropriate tokens in the appropriate places, and then making sure that our authorization is adequately and appropriately provisioned. And of course, we also need to have a disaster recovery solution in place. Our CSO, Keith Lawhorn, is working on that. And that'll be the chunk we need before rollout. We are working on a new website. If we had a bit more time today, I think we'd probably share a cut of that, but that is something we would expect probably to have at our July 17th meeting. Again, we've been using Notion along the way, which has been helpful because it's quick to set up and works well for the overlap between what our team does and what we want to share with the public. But we are building something that'd be much more publicly facing and a little easier to use in terms of finding documentation. So that will be launched in the next couple of weeks, and we are coordinating with ETS to accomplish that. One thing I quickly skipped over is the concept of decentralized verifier networks. These are essentially the verifier nodes within the Layer 0 ecosystem that we could use for the cross-chain interoperability. This is something, A, we're working on with ETS. B, we are working to make a redundant solution so we could have some things that are in the cloud, some things that are on-prem, so physical, or on the metal. And I think this is an opportunity for us to work with Wyoming's community banks and credit unions from a technical perspective to help them get set up with the infrastructure we're building, make sure we confirm that our nexus is in Wyoming as we process these transactions and get them scaled up on the infrastructure that we are building. So they'll be kind of up to speed on stable coins and get hands-on with that as well. And then finally, from an operational perspective, we did complete our applications for 7 word marks through the USPTO and Wyoming Secretary of State's office. You can see what those are there. And then we are awaiting confirmation of classifications on the bucking horse and rider. So that is owned by the Secretary of State's office, managed through the university. Essentially, we give them the classifications of goods and services. They apply them on our behalf, and we're off to the races there. And I want to thank Stephanie Chan and our team for working through all of that. A couple of final points here. I do owe the Select Committee on Blockchain a launch report that is in statute. One of the things that was amended in 2024 was before we launched the fully reserved token, we need to give the Select Committee an idea of all the actions we've taken and our expectations from the point of launch. The Minerals Committee is a recipient of that per the LSO mandate as well. And this is one of the things where Treasurer Meyer, Commissioner Meyer, has recommended in the past providing that report to the Revenue Department. And unless there's any trepidation about doing that for reasons I may not be aware of, I would think that's quite a good idea because they may not just have the oversight of what we're doing, and being that we do expect to have hopefully a positive impact on the state's budget in due time, they should be aware. I know that's a lot, but we have a number of balls we're juggling. Happy to take any questions on any of those points or topics from the commissioners.
Any questions? Commissioner Meyer, thanks for the suggestion. We'll take it under consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's no questions, we will continue moving on quickly here. So the next item in front of us is the June 2025 rulemaking update memo. Once I get all my paperwork organized over here, we'll start going through all of that. So first thing on the list here is reserves management. That is a rule set that was approved previously by the commission, uploaded for public comment, and that public comment period is open until June 30th. Hence why we've talked about getting a special meeting on the calendar for July 2nd, to make sure we get a final approval, address any feedback, and move forward from there. But of note, there are no comments on the proposed reserve management rules at this time. Okay. From the perspective of our procurement rules, which were previously passed by the commission and previously uploaded to the Secretary of State system, these have now been reviewed by LSO. Their findings were the rules appear to be within the scope of statutory authority and legislative intent. And the LSO staff recommendation was that the rules be placed on the consent list and be approved by the Management Council as submitted by the agency. I believe that Management Council, per my back and forth with LSO, has 2 weeks to perform their review. And then I believe either separate or consolidated review from LSO and Management Council will be provided to the governor for his ultimate determination to promulgate or decline those rules. We have a similar situation with our public records rule set. This is one where we assess a fee for public records requests, essentially mirroring what ANI, the AG's office, and others have done. Again, these have been approved by the commission, submitted through the Secretary of State's office to the LSO, Legislative Services Office, and then subsequently the Management Council. Per LSO's review and findings that were provided on Tuesday, the rules appear to be within the scope of statutory authority and legislative intent, and the staff recommendation is that the rules be placed on the consent list and be approved by the council as the commission submitted them. So again, 2-week turnaround on that for the feedback from LSO and the Management Council makes it to the governor's desk for the ultimate determination on whether those will be promulgated or declined. And then the last rule set we have here is token management, which will take just another minute to go through in a bit more depth, but I'll pause for questions before we get into token management on either the outstanding reserves management or the in-flight procurement or public records rules.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions? I don't see any online. Any in here? No? I think proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for some background on the token management rules, again, this is where we believe we should be implementing rules to let the community and the public know how we intend to, where we interface with the Wyoming stable token. Of course, as you go through this, perhaps there's a large number of places where policies are mentioned that we could certainly set up as an agency. Look probably similar to what ETS does, where they have lots of smaller policies governing specific things. We wanted to make sure we had some broad spectrum coverage here, and we'll cover this generally speaking in a moment. One thing I want to point out with this rule set, as well as the policy memo that we'll go through in a little bit, this is not intended for detailed review nor approval in today's meeting. Again, we talked about getting a lot of these approved at the July 17th meeting, so 4 weeks out. The expectation here is we've kind of drawn a line in the sand of here's these documents stand today. We've got another week essentially to get these all buttoned up internally amongst an agency, as well as with the AG's office and oversight from Paul Hastings. Then we kind of bring in the SMAs from industry to see if they've got any feedback on it from what they've seen in their respective operations and work. And then we'll bring it in front of the commission on that 4th week for that final approval before we look to start the process of formal rulemaking. So with that timeline being put in front, I want to provide a brief overview of the rules in front of you. Again, no need to review these in detail. You'll see that we have some of this in track changes because it is a live work in progress draft. But to bring it to it, Chapter 1 is our general provisions. Similarly to what we've seen in the past, this is where we define our key terms, as well as some of the responsibilities of the agency, where the commission would delegate that responsibility to the director. Director could delegate to the C-level executives on the team. But again, the commission would have oversight, and should there be any need to revoke that kind of authority, the commission can do so following a majority vote of the commission. The Chapter 2 is cryptographic asset management. This is where A lot of this is focused on how we are going to be custodying, securing, and rotating our private keys, which are, again, the mechanism by which we interact with the blockchain. So something that needs to be quite secure, needs to have strong controls in place, needs to have rotation, so it's not the same people working on the same things for too long, and that duties are adequately segregated. And then there's incident response authority as well, which would mirror onto some of what we have in our procurement rules around if things go a little sideways, what we are able to do within 24 hours, and then report those actions to the commission. Chapter 3 is token supply management, which compels the commissioner of the agency to develop policies and procedures around minting and burning, around the day-to-day operations. And one thing I just wanted to note as part of this, it's section 2, subsection B, giving the commission the authority to mint and burn a de minimis amount of Wyoming stable tokens for the purposes of demonstration or promotional activities. So the goal here would be just making sure that we had a carve out of a certain de minimis amount for the stable token commission or agency members to be at certain events where we could give $5 or some amount like that. That is fully reserved out to attendees at a given conference or event, or even just some of these agency trainings we're doing, give people something of small value, but so they actually have it as a tangible item, a tangible digital asset, of course. Moving on to chapter 4, interdiction of Wyoming stable tokens. I want to be specific here. Again, we've talked about the freeze and seize feature in the past. This is the chapter which has a little bit more meat on the bones here around how we'll go through this process. Again, this is all going to be critically downstream of lawful legal directives. That's a term that we've defined or will be defining up in that definitional section to really clarify that we as an agency, we have limited authority here. If we're going to be doing any kind of interdiction activities, predominantly that needs to be downstream of valid court orders, warrants, and whatnot. In terms of chapter 5, that is development, operations, and smart contract lifecycle. More to come here, but this is essentially a quick delegation of authority on how to manage smart contract updates or version control for some of the other parts of the tech stack. And then the final chapter will be chapter 6, management of other digital assets, which defines the actions to undertake following the receipt of what we call unsolicited digital assets. There's a couple of versions of these. Some of these might be things like donations. If people find our public wallet addresses and want to send us amount of, let's say, Bitcoin, this is something that does happen in the industry. We want to make sure we have the authority to triage that appropriately. And that is one of the things I brought up to the select committee in terms of our statutory review last month. There are other agencies like the Treasurer's Office where they are able to take donations provided they are for a specific intent. For us, that would very easily, in my perspective, personal opinion, be the over-collateralized fund where we have that 2% buffer over and above the amount in the trust account. We could very much liquidate and put those funds there. There's also, on the other side of things, malicious deposits where nefarious actors can try to send you digital assets to your public wallet. This would clarify and classify how we segregate those funds as soon as practicable. I will note that Fireblocks, our infrastructure provider, does have functionality to automate that function where they can kind of, as things are inbound, be swept to a separate wallet where we would work and coordinate with whatever law enforcement agency we would need to for the appropriate treatment and disposition of those malicious deposits. More to come on all of these, but wanted to get that in front of the commissioners as we are looking to draw kind of a pin in this by the end of next week and then start circulating for feedback amongst the AG and Paul Hastings, SMAs, and then the commission for final approval on July 17th. Any questions on the chapters that have been overviewed?
Questions? Director, I do have one on section 2B. I think this is fairly minimal, but being acutely aware of our constitutional 16.6 provisions, and I don't know if Devin has an opinion on this, but coming up with de minimis tokens for the purpose of demonstration promotional activities, I'm not clear if that passes that particular hurdle. So it might be something worth thinking about.
Can do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for pointing that out. We'll make sure we get a big asterisk on that one and go from there. Any other questions?
Please proceed.
Not seeing any online. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, no approvals needed, just all for informational purposes, and we will take it from there. Next up on our list is the blockchain selection exercise. So again, this is a quarterly process on a month-to-month basis. Essentially, we have kind of repeatable tasks. You do have a memo in front of you. The first, I would say pretty much the totality of page 1 and 2 is a quick recap of all of this. Suffice it to say, we have a lot of interest in this program. We have, we wanted to establish a rolling qualification procedure for candidate blockchains. This is something that we've put into our procurement rules. Again, those are not fully promulgated yet. That being said, on a good faith effort, we are still bringing this process forward, even if we're not compelled to do so. So on that quarterly basis, we break it down month to month. First month is always a review of the criteria that are in place, followed by outreach to all of the blockchain networks either that have been in the mix as candidate blockchains before or have registered on the request for information and consideration portal on our website, where they say, kind of raise their hand and say, we're interested in this. Here's our contact info. How do we get involved? So we will, once we have today's discussion, we will broadcast the updated criteria to those parties. That'll kick off our sprint to the second month, where we do a preliminary assessment of chains and let them know whether they would kind of be in scope or out of scope for us, as well as what a preliminary score would look like. And then we will correspond over the course of the third month directly with those teams to adjust the scores as needed. If we find some information that they believe to be inaccurate or not complete, we go back and forth on that. Sometimes we take the feedback if we believe it's correct. Sometimes we find something else in our formal verification. But I think the process has worked well to date. And again, everything we do on that is public through our website. As a reminder, during our meeting on May 30th, as the finale of the Q1 exercise, we did nominate, the commission did nominate 2 new candidate blockchains as Aptos and Say. So now we're up to 11 candidate blockchains. And we have been in contact with both of those teams directly about their potential involvement. So moving forward to the Q2 2025 criteria, this is a simple one for us. We were fairly happy with how we adjusted the criteria in the last quarter. So really, the only comment or update we want to propose for approval on this one would be similar to what Commissioner Wallace brought up just a few minutes ago, which is for vendor support. We want to make sure that for the candidate blockchain, they are supported, and here's the additional wording, or will be supported within the next 2 quarters by vendors engaged for the purposes of token development, blockchain infrastructure, and financial audit and attestation. So this is really wherever we touch the blockchain, we want to make sure that a candidate blockchain is on the roadmap within the next 6 months for a given network. And that was really the only change we wanted to propose. You have the full swath of criteria in front of you, but it's just that bold wording on the second, on the bottom of page 1. And then if the commission was to go ahead and approve that change, we will publish these criteria to the website, reach out to those blockchains that have expressed interest, and then start the process of getting their kind of first party information and our take on it ahead of a preliminary assessment to be provided on the July 17th meeting. So that would be my recommendation, would be to adopt this one change to the binary for vendor support. But again, happy to take any questions or commentary or feedback from the commissioners.
Thank you, Director. Let me begin with questions. Are there questions, comments? If there are none, I would entertain the motions.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the proposed change under the vendor support section.
Has that been moved? Is it being seconded?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Pope. Moved by Commissioner Racinas. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? Commissioner Ravel and Commissioner Naves, I don't know if you voted.
That I was an aye. This is Commissioner Revel.
Okay. And Commissioner Naves? I think, are there nays? If there are none, I think that passes. I see that she's trying to get on. Her computer may be muted, but in any event, it passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner Naves, through the chair, we can see that you are off mute, but we cannot hear you. So feel free to chirp in if you get that figured out. I do know you're on the road, so thank you for your time and attention today. Moving on to our next agenda item, we are beyond the blockchain selection exercise. This is the job content questionnaire proposal for let me get this title right, Business Project Management Analyst. So in previous discussions, we had talked at a high level about bringing on potentially sixth resource for the team, just based on the largesse of work currently in front of us and likely to expand as we become more of a popular commodity once we launch. We took a look at the responsibilities that we think a new hire would have and believe internally that a business project management analyst, if you have the classification table in front of you, that'd be a BAPM 09 role. Supporting the Stable Token Commission would be helpful. We have a brief description as facilitating the day-to-day operations of the agency, including tracking, reporting project status, triaging inbound tasks that may impact the commission's scope and/or timelines, supporting internal and external stakeholders with technical support. Again, we do have a technical bent to this one, and any other duties and responsibilities as determined by the commission or staff. Ideal candidates will have hands-on experience with the blockchain industry, coupled with a familiarity of Wyoming's digital asset initiatives. So again, this is going to be hands-on, day-to-day, helping us with the task management. Again, when we think about, for example, the Gantt chart we provided and kind of the high level, again, on Notion, we have all that detail at a very granular level. It's an incredible tool for us. It is quite time consuming to use and have that visibility. So having someone who could help us with that as we grow the scope here, there's going to be more, not less inbound. And I can tell you right now, there's already a lot of inbound. There's going to be more testing required as we move through the processes. So let's imagine in 6 months, we're on the Q3 or Q4, I guess at that point, blockchain selection exercise. We want to get hands-on with some of these new blockchains. They want to work with us on a testnet stable token because there will still be, testing on any given network before we roll out with them. Someone who can be doing that, managing that day-to-day basis. And again, finding someone who's got that familiarity with digital wallets, with digital assets to help us in that capacity. In terms of the essential duties, again, project planning and tracking would be about a third of their time. Technical support would also be about a third. And then beyond that, helping us prepare for meetings like these. And again, some of the other pieces we'll be taking on in the near future will include things like all of the work we're doing around the BFY 27 preparations, including the joint appropriations meetings we'll have towards the end of the year and gearing up for that, and any coverage around the legislative session. In terms of communications, working and communicating professionally with agency members and external stakeholders. We're doing, dedicating a small amount of their time to researching opportunities with the Wyoming stable token. Again, that would be downstream potentially of some of the work this resource would do with the pilot programs or alpha testers on any given chain. And then, of course, stay attuned to what's happening in the industry. In terms of the next few pages, these are pretty straightforward. As a more junior resource, they would not have any supervisory responsibilities. They would not be overseeing any other non-employees. They wouldn't be overseeing any external contractors. They would not have the ability to hire anyone. There's no budgetary responsibilities. And their authority would be pretty limited in terms of general, internal, and external communications, setting meetings, performing outreach, adjusting timelines and project plans as agreed upon with the director and commission staff. And then in terms of what they would need to defer to others, that would include communications with the commissioners, review and approval of documentation, or of course, execution of legal documents. In terms of challenges that would face a resource like this, a lot of it is simply just making sure we continue our forward momentum while there are significant changes on a day-to-day basis of what's in front of us, and making sure we stay in compliance with federal and state regulations, and we're seeing the federal regulations change in real time. In terms of the most complex problems or challenges would be for this resource needing to take ownership and initiative of the deliverables in front of them or communications. If there is no resources, the director or teammates in the agency not being directly or immediately available. In terms of education, we look for a bachelor's degree from an accredited university, 1 to 3 years of relevant experience in project or program management or software engineering and development. Hands-on experience with blockchain or digital assets would be required, and this role would be based in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And then in terms of knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies, again, subject matter familiarity, so coming back to the blockchain side of things, this track record of project delivery in the past, effective communications, we've talked about the ability to talk with and correspond with internal and external stakeholders, the ability to take initiative. We have a lot of work in front of us. Sometimes we just need to pick up the ball and go. Helping work with some of the third parties because they've all got their own timelines and making sure we cascade all of that to our own timelines. Be able to work with some of these workflow tools we employ, like Notion or Drive. And of course, have strong ethical standards, the ability to identify and manage potential conflicts of interest in the digital asset blockchain industry, full compliance with state ethics and disclosure laws, orders, and regulations. So that would be the JCQ for this particular role. We would look to move forward on this. Again, we are in correspondence with ANI around next year's fiscal considerations, but again, we look probably to move a little quicker on that through the authority we currently have in front of us, as well as the budget. Again, we saw earlier on that we can absorb the cost of this resource and still be coming in about $490,000 below our $5.8 million biennial budget. And that's again, including a $500,000 line item for functionally R&D and a $500,000 line item for marketing, which I think are both fairly in excess of what we would actually look to deploy for either of those. But we wanted to make sure we could stress test the budget a little bit and still have a lot of breathing room. We want to stay comfortable with this.
Thank you. Questions? Comments? Looks good. Thanks.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm not entirely sure we need a motion to approve this. I think we've done that in the past with some of the roles when it was perhaps just myself, but if there's comfort here, I'm happy to move forward with the process as it stands with ANI.
I think this is probably by consensus, I think, unless there's objection. Please, that'll be fine.
Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Next thing we have on our list, and the next kind of big block here, is going to be the policy update memo. And again, you have a significant amount of paperwork in front of you. Again, I will specify that this is intended to be your first kind of view of what these documents are and where they stand ahead of hopefully approval on July 17th, when these documents are formalized, finalized, and presented as complete. And then anything that we would not be able to accomplish that meeting, again, put a placeholder on August 1st to make sure we get these signed, sealed, and delivered. So in terms of the memo you have in front of you, these describe, again, the timeline at a high level, the review process of who we speak to about all of these documents, and then we get into all of the draft policies, where they currently stand, and what our next steps with them are. So I'll give you the high level. We're not going to go through all the documents specifically, but if there's any questions along the way, please do feel free to pause me and stop me with questions.
And Director, just for my edification, in terms of transparency and the ability to refer to them, these are available on the website. And
so excellent question, Mr. Chairman. These are predominantly going to be marked as privileged and confidential for the time being because they are with our counsel for review. But yes, as we move forward for formal approval in the public forum, they will be public.
thank you.
So and of course, this memo that describes them where they are is public. So in terms of these policies, the first one up is terms of service and user agreement. This is the document that is meant to travel with the stable token. So being that we are working with these licensed service providers, they are our leg to a end user, the token holder, the retail user. We don't have a agreement with every single one of those people. This is meant to kind of govern that relationship. And this will be something that both will be on our website and also by link to the website embedded in the metadata of the token. So if you look at the token, you look at the smart contract that governs it, this user agreement will be there. This one is already in pretty good shape. I want to thank Mrs. Brooks for working on this, as well as the Attorney General's office for their input. We've hybridized that input with the feedback from Paul Hastings. And as one kind of note on this, there is a section 6, on prohibited actions. That section is highly informed by existing incumbent stablecoin issuers. During our meetings with the Select Committee in the public forum, they noted perhaps providing a letter on any permitted or any lawful use. So that section we'll put kind of freeze and put a pin in for the time being, as that may change based on their input. But this one is in, again, fairly good shape and has already been through the internal review process.
And Director, with regard to that, I think it will be important for the Select Committee and the legislature kind of to understand the value of dependability from their actions. In other words, from meeting to meeting, making big changes in some of these is really problematic. And I want to make sure that they understand the concern there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will certainly note that. Moving on to the next document. This is the Wyoming Stable Token Commission privacy policy. So this is meant to classify how we would or would not, in certain instances, collect personally identifiable information from an end user. Again, this is downstream of some of the state's privacy policies, and we have the references to those in our purpose and scope. This one is under internal review. And again, if there's any input from the Select Committee on a privacy perspective, we will certainly look into that. Although I will mention that we've looked at the statute or the bill rather, that was proposed during the prior legislative session earlier this year, and around privacy and what that would entail. We've talked about it in this forum before. It did not pass. I don't know if there will be another bite at that apple in the upcoming session, but I believe the feedback some of the commissioners had on that bill specifically was it would make the day-to-day operations pretty difficult if there wasn't kind of a detailed agency by agency consideration of what some agencies need to report from a regulatory perspective at the federal level or even at the state level with existing statute. The next document is the risk disclosures. This one is, again, currently in flight. This is meant to travel with the terms of service, but as a separate carve out, just to make sure it can kind of be separately identified if need be. Really, this one is meant to focus on the risks of interacting with blockchain or stablecoins generally. We think we have enough controls in place from a statutory perspective or the work that we're doing or will do with Ernst & Young. But again, we do want to be clear about some of the risks of using a novel technology and what that looks like, and that is captured in this risk disclosures document. Moving on to the next one. This is the KYB, or Know Your Business document. The title of it in front of you is the Policy with Onboarding Licensed Service Providers. So the goal here is to make sure that since we are not going direct to an end user, we are looking to leverage licensed service providers, again, your exchanges, payment processors, digital wallets, et cetera, to help us get to the end user. We want to make sure that we can rely on them for their compliance regime. So if you were to turn to just hypothetically, page 2, you'd see all the identification of an LSP we would look for. And then if you continue reading the document around the due diligence, you'd see some of what we would look to collect and make sure they were or were, what they were involved with, the compliance from what they do have, see the things you want to be aware of, if there's enhanced due diligence required, and what an ongoing monitoring program looks like. The next one on the memo is not one we have quite yet, the licensed service provider agreement. Again, the expectation is we will need to have a contract or legal agreement with these LSPs. As such, well, that's something we need to draft, because again, similar to the existing contract discussions we have with our vendors to be engaged, and as we have engaged, there's going to be some specific nuance around our position as a state, what we can and can't indemnify or limit liability on. So we are waiting on a template on this one in particular from Paul Hastings, and then we will edit that, customize that to make sure it reflects our position as a sovereign. The next memo here is, again, more of an FYI, more so than something that'll be part of the policy regime, but wanted to make sure we were being transparent about this. This is the takedown request letter from Inca Digital. Inca Digital is our open source intelligence provider. They monitor the dark web and things like that to make sure there's no malicious actors talking about a nefarious use of a Wyoming stable token. And they also monitor blockchains to detect things like fraudulent or impersonator Wyoming stable tokens that try to use that name. Again, as a reminder, on a blockchain, you can enter kind of whatever metadata you want into a given smart contract or transaction. As such, I could say whatever token I create as a Wyoming stable token. That's why these trademark protections are so important, and that's how we enforce this. But beyond that, Inca has a function that we've engaged them to do, where as they detect these imposter tokens, impersonator tokens, they can reach out to the centralized exchange, decentralized exchange, what have you, where these may be listed or hosted, reach out directly to those teams and give them what looks a lot like a cease and desist letter. So we checked with the AG on this. We're well within our authority just to approve them and give them the authority to send these out, but wanted to provide this to the commission as an FYI, as that is a step we'll be taking going forward now that we have our patent protections or trademark protections in place at the federal level and the state level. Then there is the accounting policy and procedure, which I don't see printed out in front of us unless, no, I'm holding it. That would be the one I've got. This is, and I do want to thank our Chief Financial Officer, Joe Saldana, for taking the steps on this. This has been mostly a big solo effort up until now, until we get into the review of it, working through all the GLs, working through amounts, working through authorizations. This is downstream of the conversation we had, I think, 2 weeks ago in regards to authorizing the director and CFO to open accounts as part of our work with a reserves manager and custodian. We had talked about having a much more robust document that had things like thresholds and whatnot, and segregation of duties would be very clearly called out. That is this document. So again, looking forward to having this one in its final format in next month's meeting on July 17th. And I would have to imagine that there's certain commissioners who will get called in on this one, perhaps Commissioner Pope, perhaps Commissioner Racines. And we'll also work with not only SAO, but the A&I accounting department to make sure we're all square with these GL chart of counts and the Wolf system and whatnot that goes beyond. So that is everything I wanted to kind of give you an overview of. No recommendation from me at this point in time, no commission action required or recommended at this point in time, though, again, I'm certainly happy to field any feedback, comments, questions from the commissioners.
Thank you, Director. Questions, comments, perspectives? Commissioner Wallace.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just a question on so these will come back at our next commission meeting. So if there are some changes that we still want to make at that point, would that delay issuing the token the next month?
Through the chair, Commissioner Wallace, great question. I thank you for bringing that up. That is why I have recommended we proactively put time on the calendar for August 1st, because if anything has significant feedback to it, which we hope it wouldn't, but can always happen, that would be kind of the valve we turn to open up and make sure we have the ability and the bandwidth to make any final adjustments before we put a final stamp on these and go to market.
Okay, so that was the other meeting that you were proposing.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Other comments, questions? There are none. Joe, I want to thank you for your work, as I do also Deborah for work on these policies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will certainly relate that to the team, although they are on and can hear it live. Joe, we can see your smiling face in the room right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks.
So with all of that said, we can start winding this thing down. I didn't want to say this would be a quicker meeting because every time I say that, it ends up being a little longer. And the last time I said that, we broke the 3-hour threshold. So again, happy to take any broad feedback from the commissioners, but I will quickly just say in terms of next steps, we intend to continue working on those vendor contracts and pushing those across the line. We will keep everyone informed about our testnet redeployment. I assume we want to put out from our side a email distribution press release with those contract addresses. When those go live, I think we'll also put in those the name we're going to move using, name we're going to use, and the ticker we'll use going forward. And then we'll start bringing all of our alpha testers and pilot programs into this. They're all champing at the bit to get involved. So we're very excited to get started with them. And perhaps, I think July might be a little busy, but we'll figure out when it's an appropriate time to get some demos in front of the commission as well. I want to make sure all the commissioners see the fruits of our labor here. There's very exciting work being done in anticipation of people getting their hands on Wyoming stable tokens, and we're going to be very happy to share some of those efficiencies gained, costs saved, and whatnot from using Wyoming stable tokens. In terms of upcoming meetings and events, as I've been hammering on here, our next regular meeting is July 17th. That would be, again, primarily used to approve all of these policies that we talked about. Although I would expect along the way, as we discussed, we might meet on July 2nd to approve the reserves management rules and bring those forward. And then the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium takes place August 18th through 21st. 18th and 21st are kind of travel days, show up and depart. The substance of that symposium is the 19th and the 20th. And I'd also like to mention that the governor will be closing out the event as a keynote speaker and fireside chat with Commissioner Revel around 4:30 on the 20th before everybody starts unwinding for the more celebratory aspects of that event. So thank you for making the time and joining. Again, I will defer to the commission quickly on any final notes, questions, comments that I'm more than happy to answer. Beyond that, we would have public comment, the duration of which will be limited to 3 minutes per speaking party or 1 question for an online participant. Speakers will be asked to provide their first name, last name, and affiliation for the public records per statute. The quorum will be governed by the rules and standards of Management Council Policy 18-03 and Wyoming Statute 16-4-406. I'll pause there.
Very good. Well, let me see if there are any comments from the commission. If there are none, just pro forma, I'd love to entertain any comments from attendees, if there are any, or the public. Director, it doesn't appear that we have any of those. This is a quiet bunch today. Commissioner Revel, is there something you'd like to say?
No, Mr. Chairman, I was just turning on my camera for the adjournment.
So I'll take that as a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Real
It's been
quick,
seconded.
is there anyone online? No one online? Okay, thank you.
If there is no further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.